Good morning. Thank you for those of you who have already joined us. We are anticipating that once we start talking, more people will filter in. So we are going to start talking to make that happen. Otherwise, we'll all just stand here for half an hour drinking coffee, which would be lovely also. But thank you for those of you who have joined us on time. My name is Kirsty. I know some of you, but not all of you. I am a journalist. I've been covering the fashion industry for over a decade and quite obsessively talking about how we can move to a more responsible model of fashion production. So I am very happy to be helping to co-host this session talking about reuse, such an important topic. Probably don't need to tell you that because you're here, you want to talk about this with us. I'm not going to go into the detail of why this is such an important topic and set it in the sort of regional context because I have some experts here who are going to do that job for me, which is fantastic. So it just is down to me to tell you a bit about the format. Nothing scary, but it is a little bit different to some of the other Shoptalk sessions because we really would like to hear from you guys. We want this to be interactive. We want to, this is a learning for all of us and a conversation for all of us about what are the challenges when it comes to reuse? Why should it be a leadership conversation? How do we kind of move past any barriers to progress? And so it's so important that we hear from other people about your own experiences and perspectives. It's obviously an open forum. So I appreciate you won't necessarily want to go into too much granular detail about your individual businesses, but if we can hear from you about general sort of challenges, learnings that you've had, anything that you think might be quite useful to share, or if there's just anything you're really stuck with that perhaps, we can help with you with moving forward on that. So that's kind of the format. We'll talk a bit. My panelists, I'm going to call you, even though it's not a panel, these amazing women are going to give us some sort of provocations, really, a bit of scene setting, and then we'll start having a bit more of a discussion. I would like to start with Smruti because she is the reason we're here. This was her idea. This is an amazing powerhouse woman who, beyond what you do with bags of ethics, you really think about actually how do we move the whole industry in the right direction, which is very inspirational. So I'm going to hand over to you to sort of add some thoughts, and then we'll come to Seneca to do a bit of a regional scene setting.
Thank you, Kirsty. That was very generous. And actually, this is, I suppose, designed for everyone around here to be involved in the discussion. So I know that Kirsty is going to be sort of quizzing you all to interact. But I suppose the purpose of why we're here is that in the UAE, there's a new piece of legislation that Seneca will talk about around reducing single-use plastic and to reducing waste. And as leaders within retail, it's upon us to take this very seriously. Sustainability can be a very challenging concept, very dwarfing, and can feel quite alienating if you're doing it by yourself. And so I suppose by convening people together, we can feel that we're part of a joint mission. So a little bit about me and why I would possibly be sitting here is that our installation is just next door, but we have been on a mission around reducing single-use waste for over 25 years as a business. And it started with the supermarkets in the UK in the early 2000s when senior leaders within retail convened together and came together and created a pact called the Courtauld Pact. So you had Tesco, Sainsbury's, Marks and Spencer, and it was a CEO issue. It wasn't a chief sustainability officer issue. I don't think they even had a head of sustainability in those days. Yeah. And to convene people around a table and say, together, even though we are competitors, we're going to come together and try and tackle this issue of waste in a meaningful way. So they jointly created a pact to say that they would reduce single-use plastic. And over 25 years, we've seen a significant reduction in waste in plastic in the UK. It's not been fully successful because there are infrastructure issues with recycling. The concept of reuse is really a behavioral one. So how are you going to engage your consumer to engage beautifully and excitingly with the concept of reuse? And that's why it's delightful to have some of the sort of leaders within the industry around understanding behavior and understanding how to make it powerful and exciting for customers to be on a journey with you. So over the past 25 years, we've helped reduce over 30 billion single-use items across grocery, fashion, beauty, and lifestyle. During COVID, we had a wonderful partnership with the British Fashion Council, of which Caroline Rush has just left as chief exec, in which we helped reduce lots around single-use plastic with a reusable face covering project that raised over £1 million for charity. So I suppose we've always been at the forefront of helping businesses transition from single-use to reuse, but in a beautiful and design-focused way.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Seneca, and if you could start by introducing yourself and then giving us a bit of a regional context, that'd be great.
I'm Seneca Kadam. I'm head of sustainability for Ashaya Group. If you are not aware, Ashaya Group is the region's leading retailer. We bring some of the most coveted brands into the region, one of which is our director there is Alo Yoga, amongst others, including Starbucks. But we operate in retail and hospitality. So as you can imagine, this is a topic that we are constantly thinking about. I wrote a few words, but I don't know if I'm going to actually read them, but I've got them here just in case. But the GCC has a huge plastic problem. There are I've written some facts, about 13 to 14% of the municipal solid waste in this region is plastic waste. And that makes up about 10 million tons of plastic waste a year. Only roughly 10% is recycled, reused, or repurposed. So that means that this is a huge problem. Plastic waste is a huge problem here. And unfortunately, in this region, there are not significant facilities to manage that waste. We don't have the same recycling infrastructure. We don't have the same waste management structure or sorting structure that you would see in the US or in Europe. So that makes it even more challenging because most of the waste that you see, most of the waste that's generated will end up in landfill. And unfortunately, across the GCC, landfill space is dwindling and nearly non-existent. So that's why it's really important for us as retailers to really think about how we are designing and producing items for our businesses, especially those that are disposable. One of the things that has happened in the region as we've seen plastic bans pop up in different countries is that there's been this switch to paper. But this only is causing a different problem. It's not solving the problem. We understand the challenges of paper and paper bags, the environmental cost, the greenhouse gas emission costs, but also in this region, especially for luxury, we're using bags that are multi-material. We're using bags that have coating, and those things can't be recycled here. So they're still ending up in landfill. As part of that, the government has begun trying to tackle this in various locations. But here in the UAE, it's the most profound. They've taken the most profound action. And several years ago, they announced a ban on single-use items. Now, when you read the law, the definition of single-use is very, very specific. It is any item intended to be used once and thrown away. That's very, very specific, and that covers a lot of things. But additionally, what makes this law even more challenging is that it specifies that these items can be made of any material. So that includes paper, that includes vegetable fiber, that includes all of the things that we're trying to replace the bags with, that we think are more sustainable. So what that means is that we need to shift the question from, do we switch from paper to plastic or vegetable fiber? We need to change the question to, how do we make reusable something that our customers want? And that's what the question is. So there you go.
Thank you. And I think it is the point is it's not just then plastic bags. And I think sometimes people think when we're talking about reuse or bans on single-use plastic, it just comes down to plastic carrier bags in supermarkets, for example. But actually, it touches so many different things, doesn't it? And it's back of house, it's the consumer-facing experience, but there's so many different pieces of the puzzle that are affected.
And I think as our company is a franchise licensee partner to many, many well-known brands, and that this is what we're trying to get across to them. We're not able to, they're not able to grasp the breadth of this law.
Yeah.
And that it's not just, like you said, it's not just, okay, we can switch from a plastic bag to a paper bag.
Yeah.
No, it's really, we have to really rethink how we serve our customers.
Right. And handing over to Caroline to give us a little bit more of the context that Smriti touched upon around what's been happening in the UK and really how you've observed sort of globally how leaders in fashion and luxury perhaps, but I mean, we're not just talking about luxury here, how they're approaching this and what the kind of challenges are.
Of course. So I'm Caroline Rush. I was Chief Executive of the British Fashion Council and stepped down in May last year. So over 16 years, I saw quite a transition really in the fashion industry and how businesses were tackling sustainability. The first being thinking about sort of quite a niche play around sustainable fabrics. But that wasn't adopted more widely. And so as a leader of industry and of the British Fashion Council, we started to think collectively with our partners, so retailers, designers, including recyclers and government, how we can really shift the conversation from being quite niche into something that is adopted across the industry. And the interesting piece for me was really that needed collaboration. So to your point is that actually if you have one business that maybe is thinking about reuse or recycling or any of the sustainability challenges, you have sort of one person or a small team that's making incremental changes. And that's really difficult from a board level to get behind. Even if the intention is good, is that to do that is really challenging. So the idea for us at the British Fashion Council and in the UK was to bring industry together. There are several industry bodies, so we came together first of all, and then we brought the industry together to really think about those challenges. And the benefits of collaboration are that, of course, you have the collective action, so you have the idea that everybody comes together with common goals, common agendas. You're accelerating change because it's a systemic change, because the whole industry is moving forward behind one ideal. Your investors, if at board level you're having challenges with that conversation, it actually sort of eases investors' confidence because there's collective action, there's less risk in actually taking that forward. And of course is that it also helps you have much better conversations around what legislation should look like. Is it fit for purpose? What other partners do you need to bring into that? And indeed, how collectively as an industry do you invest in innovation to make sure that you have the best sort of use of the materials that you have collected, that you're creating the best kind of recycled materials that can either go back into the fashion industry or other purposes, and really try to solve for this problem, which is the one use, whether that is fashion or plastics, as you said, or straws, whatever it might be, that you're collectively, as an industry, solving for the challenges that you have, and you're doing it with your competitors in a brilliant collaborative way. So that for us was our Circular Fashion Innovation Network, and there was fantastic engagement from the big retailers, from the small designers, and from government as well. And for me, I think that is a really good blueprint of how the industry can move forward.
Brilliant. Okay, so that was a good scene setter. What I would love to know from those of you who are listening is, firstly, can I just see a show of hands? So don't worry, I'm not asking too much of you. Brands and retailers in the audience. If you represent a brand and a retailer as opposed to another stakeholder in the industry, can I just see hands up? So quite a few. And then do you operate in the Middle East? Yeah. Okay. So in terms of, and now I am going to slightly pick on you for putting your hands up, but don't worry, it still doesn't get too onerous. But I'm just curious to know. Does anyone feel like they're kind of cracking reuse, or do you feel like this is a big challenge that you're facing at the moment? Yeah. Can I ask, what are you finding at the moment are the biggest challenges? Would you mind if we could draw on you? And if you're happy to sort of introduce your company, that would be great, or you can do it anonymously.
Hi, my name is Kunal, and I'm the founder of the Luxury Closet. It's a pre-owned resale marketplace based out of the based out of UAE. And it allows sellers of luxury assets to easily sell their merchandise, and then we sell these items globally. So it is a circular kind of model for luxury fashion.
Yeah. And can you just tell us a little bit about why is reuse an interesting topic for you? You know, what are your concerns around waste and how you manage that going forward?
So look, the business model in itself attacks the fashion waste by giving items another life,
Yep.
right? That's what the model does in itself. And I mean, that in itself is a large problem because I don't know what the estimates are that factories around the world make 80 billion products a year, 100 billion products a year. An average closet is what, like 150 items, and people keep on buying more and more items. And then, of course, most of that ends up in a landfill. So it's just one of those models. I mean, there's a lot of these industries where they hit a wall. You cannot keep on operating the way you're operating in the future, like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever the number of years are. So that's pretty much what we do.
Do you find the mindset here, are consumers becoming more aware of the need to, like, do they come to you because they feel like there's a need to reuse, or
Good,
is it more
that's a good
because they're
question.
trying to discover something unique? You know?
So I think we're lucky, and we're in a place where the value proposition is so good that it makes them adopt a sustainable model. Yeah. So it's not sustainable. It happens to be sustainable, but the value proposition is that you can get a Louis Vuitton bag at 50% off. How else can you do it if you don't buy it secondhand? You cannot. So the value proposition is so obvious and so good that it enables sustainable commerce. So now I think that's the best way of doing it, where it's not just so either there's a government there's a law which says you cannot do it, and somebody sets that. In that case, you cannot do it. Else, it's really good to have a value proposition that just makes life easier. It makes adoption much easier.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, even though the value proposition is quite clear, there is a stigma, right? Because as a percentage of the industry in the Middle East is very small, it should become larger. So we see people adopting it, and how we see it is that people would do it for handbags first. Mm-hmm. And now we're seeing like this huge uptake on clothing, like huge, like double year on year clothing as a category. And that's great because, it's a pre-owned shirt you just bought, pre-owned pants you bought, right? And you put it on your body, and it's been used by somebody before. So that is a really good place to be in.
That sort of stigma, does that resonate? I feel like when I've been having conversations even over the last 24 hours at Shoptalk here, I do feel like there's quite a lot of, pushback. There's a feeling that it's not what a lot of leaders are engaged with, because it's not really what, there is still a sort of education piece with the consumer. The consumers are maybe just starting to adopt the idea of resale, rebuying things, but actually still it's sort of seen as more of a luxury to be able to use things once and throw them away. Why would we want to reuse them? What do you...
I mean, yesterday we had a really great discussion where Gen Zs are Gen Zs. So there was a sort of 14 to 29-year-olds are Gen Zs, and we had a panel of Gen Zs who wanted to talk about sustainability, and they all looked incredible. And they all said that they were wanting to wear vintage pieces because they were produced in a better quality, and then they also wanted to personalize it. And they also talked about different platforms who've changed the narrative around sustainability by the storytelling aspect. So the luxury closet, eBay was referenced several times as a great platform to find incredible pieces. So that's the future. I mean, we had 4 or 5 of them talking about how they wanted to adopt a sustainable lifestyle, not because they wanted to, but because it was part of their personal identity. Yeah. And that was really brilliant. And it was getting it at a good price, because they couldn't afford to have a full price item. And actually, they were condescending, and they were sort of quite disappointed with luxury brands trying to sell them something for a really inflated price, and they were disgruntled by that. And they were looking for authentic pieces that were held with such passion and love from someone else. So that is part of the big storytelling piece that I think was really interesting yesterday.
I'd be interested to know, though, for everyone here, to what extent is it the consumer behavior is going to change business behavior, or is it that regulation really is here? You know, this isn't something we're talking about in theory. The regulation is here. People, businesses have to comply.
I think that there's an element of both of those. So first, there's an element of legislation. So I always quote this study that BCG did. I know it was 2021, but they actually interviewed 5,000 locals from the GCC, not expats, locals. Mm-hmm. And in that study, they talked about how locals, they understand sustainability, they understand climate change, they want to do something about it. But what they teased out is that they didn't know what to do about it. And then the other more important thing is that if it was important, the government would tell us to do something. So I think that's a big part of it. Mm-hmm. There is this expectation that if something is wrong, if I need to make a change, my government's going to know what changes we need to make, and they're going to guide us on that journey.
Yeah.
And so that's why legislation in this region in particular is really important. And then we have to talk about especially with reuse, and especially talking about bags. It is a behavior. It's a behavioral change, and we need to understand that it's not something that people are accustomed to. It's not part of the culture to carry a bag with you. It's something that's been happening in Europe for decades now, and this is very, very new here. So we need to incentivize our customers to make that change, and that's also what was teased out. Customers need incentive to make behavioral changes, and they're expecting incentives. They want to be rewarded for doing the right thing, and we need to recognize that.
What would those incentives look like?
I mean, I've been exploring personally for Ashaya. Ashaya has the largest loyalty program in the region, and it's award-winning loyalty program, Aura. And I've been exploring how do we integrate bringing our bags back, having customers bring bags back, and give them points, and those points translate into cash, and especially with wonderful Smruti here, who has all of the beautiful options, creating a bag that is so covetable that everybody wants to carry, that everybody wants to carry the bag. We have to make it something that people want to do, and it's not punitive.
Caroline?
I was going to say is that having been in the industry for a number of years, is that it feels like the conversation that we were having when the legislation came in the UK around plastic bags. And there were some really great brand plays at that time that helped change some of the consumer narratives. So yes, and it is, the whole industry has to move at once. You have to have the legislation to make it happen. But I think there's a role for brands to play in terms of just enthralling the customer and creating great product that they want to hold. One of the case studies that a lot of people refer to is the Anya Heim March, I'm Not a Plastic Bag.
Yeah.
And there were these viral moments that were happening, not just in the UK, but actually all over the world, because the product was great and it was something that you could buy. It was an accessible price point. And we had a similar thing, is that we used to work with Smruti on the bags for London Fashion Week, and we would get a designer to create the bag. And the joy that people had in sort of having a little piece of Fashion Week, whether you were an attendee or not, is that quite often is that they were given as totes. And you would see them, on the underground years later as a specific bag. And people keep them because actually if the product's great, it's something that you keep and you use time and time again. So I think there's a role for brands and retailers to play in actually creating fantastic product that the consumer wants to have and to use time and time again.
Absolutely, and you applied that also to the face mask, right? That was the point there, is that it became, and I love that, it became something that was like, well, I am going to dispose of this thing that you have presented to me that is very clearly disposable, but actually when you reframe it by going, this is something that's been led by design and, and just had a kind of like cool, quirky factor to it. And so you immediately start to think of it differently. But I do also agree that the legislation drove a lot of the consumer behavior. I don't think you can wait for it to happen, right? And I remember it, so well that everybody said, well, this is just going to be awful. And none of us wanted to have to remember our bags and things like that. And now you just do because it's just become habitual. For the sort of the other players that operate in this region that are not sort of resale businesses, so don't necessarily have that circularity built in terms of the product, what are the challenges? I keep looking at you, so sorry, I might just pull on you if that's all right. But what are the challenges or barriers in terms of having the conversation about reuse? Is it just the sort of infrastructure internally, the lack of, what do we actually do with the waste and how do we move forward?
The good news is we have a lot of support. Like, we're super lucky to have Seneca, who kind of really leads it for our entire business. I think there's a lot of layers to this. I think one of it is brands, especially working with a luxury brand, having that bag, it's almost part of the experience of shopping that brand. And until your really luxury players start moving on, I do think that can be a bit challenging, because I think the idea of a reusable bag feels cheaper. So it's changing their mindset on it. I mean, we're lucky that we've been working with Smriti on a beautiful bag that I think we're finally going to get signed off. But the other part of that is they're expensive. And, we're running a business, we're trying to make money, so also producing a beautiful bag that people want to hold is also a really expensive thing to have. So getting that balance and trying to make people really desire the bag, which I think is the bag we've got, but the cost price is going up significantly. So it's going to be a challenge. And I think bringing the bag back could be a really big thing for us. How do we make sure that people, want to bring it back? Because I think the idea of getting a new one of those every time you come is also very desirable, because if it's a beautiful bag and you're going to get it every time you shop, people are going to want to do that as well. So it's going to be a balancing act. I think we're ready for when the legislation is dead set, we're ready to go, I think, when we finally get this bag approved. But it is challenging. And I think in Dubai specifically, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the customer is so transient that I don't think they're, if you're on holiday, you're not thinking so much about taking a bag with you. I mean, 60% of my customers in Dubai are more tourists.
Yeah.
So they're not thinking about, I'll make sure I take a bag with me because I'm going to do some shopping. So I think in this region that might also be a little bit challenging as well.
Yeah. And you talked about approvals. Do you find that it's becoming easier to have that conversation with leadership, with people that are who are signing this off?
Yes, I think they're getting on board, but I think the problem is when they're looking at players like Chanel, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, and they're not seeing them move on in the same way, they're like, well, we're aspiring to be we're aspiring to be that level of luxury. So how can we go in a different direction when they're not yet?
That's so interesting, isn't it? It's sort of like wanting the validation of being the same as some of these heritage brands, but actually, surely the advantage or the opportunity is to be the innovator who's doing it a bit differently.
Yeah, and Aloe is all about sustainability.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that they do in the US on their Aloe Access system. People can give points into cleaning up the ocean and doing lots of great stuff. So they're definitely on board with it. But it's a big mindset change for them. We're the first ones in the world that are doing this. They've got stores all over the world, and UAE is the first people that are bringing in the legislation that says this has to happen. So it's a big shift for them.
Yeah. Do you think, Smriti, from the conversations you were having yesterday with these Gen Zs, who are amazing, very intimidating, do you think that they will increasingly, expect this from both the resale sites that they go to? They'll be looking for, thinking about reusable packaging, that kind of thing, but also from, if they're buying firsthand, are they expecting it? Do we think this is going to start to drive the way that people choose which brands to shop from, which ones they're loyal to?
I think it's all part of the storytelling piece and also being really authentic. The two words yesterday, the two buzzwords were storytelling and authentic. And in fact, a lovely lady wearing a pink beret just walking there. She's starting her own resale platform, and she is really, really keen to find something compostable. Not because it's better for the environment only, but because she deeply cares that it will be important for her brand value to be associated with something 100% circular. So of course, in terms of the next generation of consumers, they are 100% far more discerning. They're always online. They're always hearing people's opinions. Their go-to platform was TikTok, in which opinions are very real and authentic. They're not here to see very airbrushed or sort of flashy images. They want to hear from how to use the product directly from another user. And so they will be really discerning. And I think that was very refreshing, actually, about the Gen Zers yesterday.
The other aspect of this that we keep coming back to is really whether this is a leadership discussion point. Is this something leadership should be thinking about, or can they sort of delegate that essentially? And I guess we're kind of making the argument that it does need to be a leadership point of view. And I was having a conversation yesterday about CEOs within luxury fashion at the moment, and again probably applications for the mass market as well, around CEOs becoming more visible and sort of modeling values now that, and people look to them to see what those values are, and they sort of extract that down to the businesses. And I just thought that's so interesting, isn't it? That now you might look at the actual CEO who traditionally has always made decisions about, where are we sourcing, what packaging are we using? All of these things would have been so like behind the scenes, but now, as consumers, we're kind of taking more of an interest in it, and that is a very new place still for a lot of us to be in, right? I don't know if I had a question necessarily, just an observation.
But you're right, leadership is important. And just to give you a little anecdote, so I actually come from a property background, and I took this role because as I was leaving the company, as the CEO was being promoted into the CEO role. John Haddon is our CEO. And I was talking to him about leaving, and he's like, don't leave. And I told him I wanted to do something that actually made a difference.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, this is something that I want to embed in the business. He said he wanted to bring sustainability to the business. And so then we crafted a position, the position of head of sustainability from that conversation. And because he wanted the company to be more sustainable, to be able to move into the future, to be more desirable for younger talent to come into the business, and to be a good representation in the community.
Yeah.
So it is really important that direction is coming from leadership. And even with this whole carrier bag change, I have been getting for the last 2 years, well, do we have to really do it? It's going to be expensive. Do we have to really do it? And what's great is that from our CEO, from our COO, yes, we have to do the right thing.
Yeah. It's about sort of doing the right thing, but also I suppose we're couching it in the terms of it's not just because it's the right thing. It's actually, we're going to have to do it anyway. If we get ahead of the conversation now, actually over time you can work out ways to make it more efficient, right?
And I think what Caroline said was very important around the brand touch point, because the Anya Hindmarsh example is a brilliant British example, but a global phenomenon, in that the touch point for the customer doesn't just end after they leave the shop. It persists for however long that branded, logoed or item lasts in that consumer's hand. And if you design it beautifully, it won't end up in landfill, and it won't end up on the streets of Knightsbridge or in the chicest of hotels as sort of leftover packaging after someone's shopping trip. It's a very important customer touch point that if you design well, can really drive customer loyalty and brand affinity.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to go back to the leadership point, is that when we were bringing together the businesses for the Circular Fashion Innovation Network, it was really interesting because our first go-to was either the CEO or the head of sustainability, because we needed both on board. And there were some instances, fortunately, we had a lot of CEOs that were on board and wanted their team to be involved and would allocate the time. And you really felt that the values from the top down was driving this sustainability agenda. But there were some businesses where the sustainability team were doing a fantastic job, but they knew that there was no recognition at board.
Yeah.
So they knew that there was a constant argument. They had to prove the case. They had to demonstrate the value. Now, they would still turn up to the meetings because actually the shared knowledge and collaboration they were getting were arming them with the power to actually convince the CEO or the board that actually they should take action. But we certainly saw in businesses where the top down is that not only did the whole business get behind it because leadership were behind it, but they were accelerating in terms of their programs, communication to consumers, really changing perceptions and where their brands stand from a sustainability perspective.
What about for those of you listening? To what extent is that the biggest barrier still? Is really getting that buy-in from board level?
Yeah, I would say it absolutely comes, not just the buy-in, because I think quite often you've got companies who've even gone as far as to change their articles and, could be on a B Corp journey, but actually long-term invest in these changes. So not the next 12, 24 months, looking at how not just taking a little bit of the marketing budget because they want to prove a proof of concept, but actually either how can we take a hit on the margins or properly be investing 3, 5, 10 years down the line, and especially during a challenging retail environment, that's a really difficult conversation to be having to get, to properly allocate those funds.
Anyone else?
Thank you. I totally agree. Having worked for a luxury brand, one of the challenges is that if the senior leadership is not supported, it takes a long time. I also think that the industry is very programmed to think in shorter cycles. So when you're transitioning out into something more sustainable, there's an immediate comparison to like for like cost.
Yeah.
And the industry's got to get used to thinking in longer cycles, because if it comes from the top and the directive is do it, 9 times out of 10, the teams figure out how to make it happen given an appropriate amount of time. So I think, and that's merely because, around a sustainability initiative, you don't have all the attention from the logistics teams, and logistics plays a massive role in a transition like that. The material developers and so on and so forth. Everyone's very focused on the core product and not necessarily packaging. So if anything, I think the industry does need to take a slightly longer view in order to transform.
Yeah. Again, that's quite a new way of thinking, isn't it? And I think that's the power in great leadership now, is that sort of quieter, longer term thinking and having the sort of, I suppose, resilience to see things through, because you need to for these kind of conversations. Conscious it's getting quite hot. So we'll sort of start to wrap things up, but I just wonder, is anyone sitting there thinking, yeah, this is all very well and good, but it's like I'm having a specific issue that hasn't been addressed? Anyone got any other experiences or questions that you'd like to ask? Great, so we've just covered everything. That's great. I'm just going to assume from your silence that we have just done it all. No, that's fab. I deliberately wanted to leave a few minutes at the end as well, and if it's okay, we'll sort of hover for a bit, because what we would really like to explore as well is, in terms of the theme of collaboration, is there, what value is there in actually coming together? And we have seen that in the UK, that there was really this sort of unity, and these retail leaders really came together and took a proactive approach to how do we move forward together and solve some of the problems that a lot of us are facing. And so we were, we would like to explore sort of how that learning could be brought into other regions. So if you are interested in perhaps, joining some sort of collective where, this becomes an ongoing conversation, because of course we can't solve all of these problems today. This was just a initial conversation to really get a sense from some people what the challenges are. But this legislation is still relatively new. People are still bedding it in. So keeping going with this conversation, keeping in touch, collaborating between different businesses, different stakeholders, I think is very valuable. So if that is of interest, please do come and have a chat with us. If you'd like to stay in touch, if you'd like to know more, keep the conversation going. If you think there's anything we haven't tackled that maybe could be approached another day, then we'd love to hear it. So any final questions? with the group? Anyone, any clues?
Seneca, how do you feel that brands can come together in the region? Is there a sense of heightened competition, where they would not be seen to be wanting to collaborate? Or is there a sense that actually you can collaborate as an industry?
So there are a few industry groups in the region where people are coming together, businesses are coming together around packaging. We have this Circular Packaging Association, but specifically around the issue of carrier bags, there's nothing that's happening right now. And I think this is an area where we can collaborate, specifically on how do we get our customers engaged. And we can all work together to get them engaged in doing the right thing.
Brilliant. Lovely. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for coming and contributing. And as I say, we'll be hanging around for a few minutes, so if you want to come and have a chat in the shade, then we'd love to hear from you. And thank you to my panelists.